At my sister's wedding, I accidentally unlocked my wife's phone and discovered intimate messages and a video between her and my newly married brother-in-law. In just a few seconds, my entire world collapsed. I quietly followed them, gathering evidence throughout the wedding reception and in the days that followed, uncovering that this secret affair had begun long before the ceremony, revealing a betrayal that involved the whole family. If you want to know how this story ends and see the truth fully exposed, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Mornings in Atlanta started early for me, not because I liked them that way, but because people depended on it. Trucks didn't wait, neither did deadlines. I supervised a regional logistics team, which meant my phone stayed on even when I didn't want it to. If something stalled, it was my job to clear the path. At home, the pace slowed. Malik usually sat at the counter, half awake, scrolling through his phone while pretending to listen to whatever reminder I gave him about school. I packed his lunch more often than not. That was our quiet routine. No speeches, just showing up. Tessa moved through the kitchen behind us, efficient and distant at the same time. She wasn't cold, she just wasn't present. Some mornings she kissed my cheek. Other days she nodded like we were coworkers passing in a hallway. I told myself marriages had seasons. I'd lived through worse. Wedding preparations for my sister Renee filled the weekends. Dress fittings, planning dinners, last-minute errands that somehow became urgent emergencies. Family crowded into living rooms, talked over one another, argued about colors and seating like it all mattered more than it did. Marcus was always there. He never arrived late, never raised his voice. He offered help before anyone asked. On the surface, he looked like the kind of man you trusted with responsibility. What caught my attention wasn't what he did, it was how he did it. His eyes lingered too long when Tessa laughed. His phone lit up at the same moments hers did. When I entered a room, conversations didn't stop, but they shifted. Subtle, clean, like nothing had happened. Once, during a planning dinner, I watched Marcus lean close to Tessa while Renee was distracted with her mother. He said something under his breath. Tessa didn't pull away. She smiled, quick and private, then noticed me standing there. Her shoulders stiffened. "Can you grab some ice?" she asked, too fast. I nodded and headed for the kitchen. The freezer hummed while I filled the tray, my reflection faint in the stainless steel. That was the moment I felt it, not certainty, not proof, but a quiet discomfort I didn't know what to do with. I chose silence. Silence had worked before. It kept peace. It kept Malik from seeing tension at the table. It kept Renee happy during what she called the best time of her life. I told myself I was being mature, responsible. At another gathering, phones buzzed late into the night. We sat in Renee's living room, empty plates scattered around, wedding playlists playing softly from someone's speaker. Tessa checked her screen and stepped outside without a word. Marcus followed minutes later, claiming he needed air. I stayed on the couch. My mother asked about Malik's grades. Someone joked about traffic. The night kept moving. When Tessa returned, her face had changed. Not guilt exactly, more like alertness. She avoided my eyes and reached for her purse. "I'm tired," she said. "We should head out." In the car, the silence felt heavier than usual. Streetlights passed. Traffic thinned. Her phone vibrated once on the console between us. She flipped it face down without looking. I didn't ask. As we pulled into our driveway, Malik already asleep in the back seat, I carried him inside. His weight pressed into my shoulder the way it always had. Solid, trusting. I laid him down, pulled the blanket up, and stood there longer than necessary. Later that night, I sat at the edge of the bed while Tessa showered. Steam crept under the bathroom door. Her phone rested on the nightstand, dark and still. My hand didn't reach for it. The next evening, after another planning meeting that ended with laughter and forced smiles, I left alone. No argument, no announcement, just a nod and my keys. The road stretched out ahead, empty enough to let my thoughts wander where they'd been avoiding all day. Traffic signals changed on schedule. The car stayed centered in its lane. Everything worked the way it was supposed to. That was when the thought settled in, quiet but heavy. Staying silent hadn't protected anything. It had only made room for things I didn't want to see, and I kept driving as the city slipped past without waiting for me to decide what came next. The next morning didn't wait for me to catch up. Emails stacked up before I finished my first coffee. A driver missed a delivery window. A warehouse supervisor wanted authorization to reroute inventory. I answered everything without delay, voice steady, decisions clean. Work had always been a place where effort turned into results. That part of life still obeyed rules. Family didn't. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother asking if everything was okay. No context, just that question. I stared at it longer than necessary, then typed back that I was fine. A lie, but a simple one. Easier than opening a door I wasn't ready to walk through. At lunch, I checked social media out of habit. Photos from the wedding were already circulating. Smiles frozen mid-laugh. Renee glowing. Marcus's arm wrapped around her waist. Tessa tagged in several shots, her comments light, playful, normal. Too normal. At home that evening, she moved through the rooms like a guest who knew where everything was but didn't belong there. She spoke about errands, about Renee's honeymoon plans, about nothing that mattered. Malik asked her a question about a school project. She answered without looking up from her phone. Later, while I rinsed dishes, she leaned against the counter. "You've been distant," she said. Water ran over my hands. Plates clinked softly. "Busy week," I replied. She watched me, waiting for more. When nothing came, she nodded as if that explained everything. Her phone vibrated again. She stepped away to answer it, voice low, words clipped. The distance didn't feel loud. It felt calculated. Over the next few days, the tension seeped into places it didn't belong. Renee called to ask why I'd left the last gathering early. A cousin joked that married life must be wearing me out. At church on Sunday, people greeted me warmly, then glanced past me like they expected someone else to fill the space. Marcus avoided me. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. When we crossed paths at a family dinner, he spoke to everyone else first. When he finally turned to me, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good to see you, brother," he said, voice smooth. "You too," I answered. He shifted his weight, like he wanted to say more but decided against it. Tessa stayed close to Renee that night, laughing louder than usual, touching her arm, performing loyalty where it was easiest to see. Driving home, Malik talked about practice. I listened, responded at the right moments, nodded when needed. He deserved that much from me. When he went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, lights off, phone face down on the table. A thought kept circling. Maybe I'd misread everything. Maybe stress had sharpened my imagination. People crossed lines sometimes without meaning to. Families were messy. That didn't always mean betrayal. Then another message arrived. Not from Tessa, from Marcus. "Did I do something to upset you?" I didn't answer. The pressure didn't come all at once. It accumulated. A remark here, a look there. Renee asking if I was judging her husband. My mother reminding me how important it was to keep peace in the family. Each comment landed softly, but together they weighed more than I expected. Silence started to feel less like control and more like isolation. I met Daniel 2 mornings later at a small cafe near my office. He'd been a colleague years ago, before moving into consulting. We kept in touch without effort, which was rare at my age. He arrived early, already seated, coffee untouched. "You look tired," he said, not unkindly. I ordered and sat across from him. The chair creaked as I shifted. "I haven't been sleeping much." "That's not what I meant." He waited. No rush. That was his way. Words came out slower than I expected. I didn't give details. I didn't name names. I spoke around the edges, about feeling pushed aside, about noticing things that didn't add up, about choosing quiet because it seemed safer. Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. "Let me ask you something," he said. "If this were happening to Malik, what would you tell him to do?" The question landed hard. I pictured my son years from now, shoulders slumped, trying to convince himself that disrespect was the price of love. "I'd tell him not to ignore his instincts," I said. Daniel nodded. "Then why are you?" I didn't have an answer ready. That bothered me. We talked about boundaries, about how silence can turn into permission if it lasts long enough. He didn't tell me to confront anyone. He didn't tell me to leave. He just pointed out something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was carrying this alone, and it was costing me more than I realized. Back at the office, work felt different. Focus sharpened. Decisions came faster. Somewhere between meetings, I noticed how calm settled in when I stopped arguing with myself. That evening, as I pulled into the driveway, Tessa was already home. Her car sat there, engine still warm. Inside, she spoke quickly, nervously, about plans for the weekend, about needing space to think. I set my keys down and listened. Not to the words themselves, but to the space around them. The gaps, the deflections. Later, after Malik went to bed, I stood in the hallway holding my phone. Messages waited, some unanswered, some newly arrived. I scrolled through them slowly, then opened my notes app and typed a date at the top of a blank page, adding the first line as I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the house settle into quiet. The grocery store parking lot wasn't where I expected anything to change. I had stepped out to take a call from work, something minor about a delayed shipment, when I heard my name carried by voices a few spaces down. I didn't recognize them at first. Two women from Renee's circle, friends of friends, standing beside an open trunk, talking without lowering their voices. "I'm just saying, it's weird," one said. "Marcus?" the other replied. "He's always been attentive. Too attentive, especially with her." They didn't say Tessa's name. They didn't need to. The pause afterward did the work. I walked past them like I hadn't heard a thing, unlocked my car, and drove off. Traffic moved the way it always did. My hands stayed steady on the wheel. Still, something shifted. The doubt I'd been fighting didn't ease. It multiplied. At home later that night, Tessa sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, leg tucked under her. Malik was in his room, door half closed, music low enough that I could hear it breathe between notes. I asked Tessa if she wanted dinner. "I already ate," she said, not looking up. That was new. She usually made a point of telling me where she'd been. Tonight, the explanation didn't come. I went into the kitchen and opened my laptop. Not for work. I pulled up the phone bill instead. We shared an account, always had. Transparency was supposed to mean something. The call log loaded slowly. Numbers blurred together at first, then patterns started to surface. Late night calls, short bursts, the same number repeating, sometimes 3 or 4 times in a single hour. Marcus's number. My chest tightened, then loosened, like it couldn't decide what to do. I told myself there were explanations, wedding stress, planning chaos. People leaned on each other during big moments. That didn't mean betrayal. Still, I copied the data into a spreadsheet and saved it. No labels, no conclusions, just dates and times. In the following days, the air around me changed. Conversations paused when I entered rooms. Plans were made without looping me in. Renee stopped calling as often. When she did, her voice sounded careful, like she was choosing each word from a short list. "Marcus mentioned you've been stressed," she said one afternoon. "He worries about you." I let that sit. "Does he?" I asked. She hesitated. "You know what I mean." I did. It meant stories were being told, versions of me that fit whatever narrative they needed. Tessa started guarding her phone like it held something fragile. Screen down, face recognition instead of a passcode, quick glances before replying to messages. Once, when I walked into the room unexpectedly, she flinched, covered the screen with her hand. "You scared me," she said. I apologized without knowing why. The sense of being managed crept in quietly. Family group chats filled with cheerful updates that didn't include me. Marcus took on more of a leadership role, organizing events, checking in with people, positioning himself as the steady one. When disagreements came up, his opinion landed heavier than mine. At dinner one night, he leaned back in his chair and smiled across the table. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Everything good?" Eyes turned toward me, not concerned, curious. "Just listening," I replied. He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something. Afterward, I stood at the sink washing plates while voices murmured behind me. Words blurred together, but my name surfaced once, then again. I focused on the rhythm of water and ceramic, committing the sounds to memory without reacting. That night, instead of sleeping, I organized. Screenshots went into folders. Messages stayed unmarked but saved. I wrote down moments that felt off, times, places, who was present. Not like a detective, more like a man trying to keep his footing in a room where the floor had started to tilt. I stopped sharing certain details. My schedule became vague. Answers shortened. I cut off a few casual check-ins, let calls go to voicemail, not out of spite, out of necessity. Malik noticed before anyone else. "You okay?" he asked one evening as we sat on the porch. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" "You think a lot more lately." I smiled at that. Kids always knew. Inside, Tessa paced while talking on the phone, voice low, door half closed. I couldn't hear words clearly, just cadence. When she hung up, she glanced at me like she'd forgotten I was there. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Fine," she said too quickly. Just family stuff. I nodded and went back to helping Malik with his homework, math problems, clean lines, answers that followed rules. Later, alone in bed, I scrolled through the call log again. One entry caught my eye, a number I didn't recognize, sandwiched between 2 calls to Marcus, both late at night. I copied it down, then searched it. Nothing public, no name attached. That was when it hit me, not with panic but with clarity. The structure I trusted, the unspoken agreement that family meant safety, had shifted without my consent. Decisions were being made around me, not with me. Information flowed past me, not toward me. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Tessa lay beside me, breathing evenly, turned away. The space between us felt deliberate. My hand reached for the nightstand and slid a small notebook closer. I opened it, added another line beneath the date I'd written days earlier, and kept writing until the pen slowed, listening to the house settle while something else quietly came apart. The call came while I was in a meeting. Not dramatic, no raised voices, just my manager asking me to step outside for a minute. His tone stayed polite, the way people sound when they've already made up their minds but don't want to look careless doing it. We stood near the break room. He folded his hands, then unfolded them. "Something came up," he said. "Concerns about a potential conflict of interest." I waited. "A family connection," he continued. "Nothing proven, just enough that legal wants us to be cautious." Marcus's name didn't come up. It didn't need to. I nodded once. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "Temporary reassignment," he said. "Different accounts. No direct oversight for now." That was the first hit. Clean, quiet, no accusation I could argue with, just distance created where trust used to be. Back at my desk, screens looked the same as always. Numbers still added up. People passed by and spoke in normal voices. Still, the shift had already happened. A few colleagues avoided eye contact. One offered an awkward smile like he'd heard something, but wasn't sure how much. At lunch, my phone buzzed with a message from Renee. "Why didn't you tell me about the issue at work?" I stared at the words, then typed back that it was being handled. Another lie, shorter this time. The family meeting happened that evening at my mother's house. No warning, just an invitation framed as concern. When I arrived, everyone was already there. Renee sat close to Marcus. Tessa leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I took a seat without asking. Marcus cleared his throat. "We wanted to talk openly," he said. "There's been tension." Renee nodded along, eyes fixed on the table. "Some people feel uncomfortable," he continued. "At work, in the family. It's being noticed." I met his gaze. "By who?" I asked. He smiled gently, like I'd missed the point. "By people who care." The room stayed quiet. My mother shifted in her chair. "Marcus is just trying to help," she said. "You've seemed distracted lately." I let the words land without reacting. Emotion would have given them what they wanted. "If there's something specific," I said, "say it." Marcus leaned forward. "There are concerns about how you handle stress," he said. "About boundaries, about how that affects everyone else." That was the accusation. Soft-edged, but sharp enough to draw blood. Tessa finally spoke. "I've been worried," she said. "You shut down. You don't communicate." I looked at her then. Really looked. The steadiness in her expression didn't match the words. "I'm listening now," I said. No one responded. The meeting ended without resolution. No apology, no clarity. Just the implication that something about me had changed, and not for the better. Driving home, I felt the second hit arrive. A notification from the bank, an account adjustment. Funds moved from our joint savings into an account I didn't recognize. The amount wasn't devastating, but it wasn't small either, enough to send a message. At home, Malik was doing homework at the table. He glanced up when I walked in. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Go ahead and finish that." He went back to work. I stood there a moment, then opened my laptop. The transfer showed up clearly, authorized earlier that day. Tessa's signature. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I documented it. Screenshots, dates, account numbers. Everything went into the same folder I'd been building piece by piece. Later, Tessa came into the room. "We need to talk about finances," she said. "We will," I replied. She frowned, like she'd expected resistance. "Things are tense," she added. "I'm trying to protect us." I nodded once. "So am I." She left it at that and went upstairs. Footsteps faded. The house settled into its usual nighttime rhythm. I checked on Malik, then returned to the kitchen. Bills waited on the counter. The notebook lay open where I'd left it. I added the day's events in careful handwriting, paused, then pulled up my email and began drafting a message to legal, choosing my words slowly while the clock on the stove ticked toward midnight. The message came from a number I didn't recognize. It didn't explain much, just a sentence, careful and vague. Not my place, but you deserve to know this didn't start recently. I read it twice, then once more, slower. No name attached, no accusation spelled out. Still, it landed heavier than the bank alert had days earlier. I typed a response asking who it was from, then deleted it. Whoever sent it hadn't reached out to start a conversation. They wanted to leave something behind and walk away. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Thoughts moved in circles, brushing against memories I'd kept filed away because they'd never added up before. A weekend conference Tessa attended last year, supposedly with coworkers, that overlapped with a family emergency Marcus mentioned the same week. A holiday dinner where Renee joked about how close her fiancé and my wife had become during planning, then laughed too loudly when no one joined in. None of it had felt sharp enough to cut at the time. Together, the pieces formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. The next morning I met Daniel again. Same cafe, same corner table. He noticed the stiffness in my shoulders before I said anything. "Looks like you crossed a line," he said. "I think the line's been there," I replied. "I just kept stepping back from it." I told him about the message, about the account transfer, about work quietly moving me aside without naming the reason. I didn't rush. Daniel didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You're not choosing between peace and conflict," he said. "You're choosing between control and erosion." I stirred my coffee, though it didn't need it. "I don't want revenge," I said. "Good," he answered. "Revenge keeps you tied to them." He let that settle. "What you want," he continued, "is agency. The ability to decide what stays in your life and what doesn't. That requires action, quiet action, legal action." The word landed cleanly. Not heavy, not dramatic. Agency. We talked through options without framing them as ultimatums. Documentation, boundaries, protecting Malik first, separating finances, limiting what information I shared and with whom. Daniel didn't tell me what to do. He outlined consequences, let me choose. By the time we left, the path felt clearer, even if it wasn't easier. The isolation tightened as the week moved on. Family dinners stopped including me. Renee canceled a lunch we'd planned, said she needed space to think. Marcus stepped further into the role of mediator, calling relatives, smoothing conversations, shaping the story before I could speak. At church, people asked if I was okay with the reassignment at work. The word spread without effort, concern wrapped in curiosity. Tessa leaned into it. She spoke softly about how worried she was, how hard things had been, how she hoped everyone could be patient while I figured myself out. Each sentence painted her as steady and me as fragile. At home, she packed a bag one afternoon without explaining why. "I'm staying with Renee for a few days," she said. "Things feel tense here." I didn't stop her. Malik watched from the hallway, face unreadable. "Is Mom mad?" he asked after the door closed. "No," I said. "She's just choosing where she wants to be tonight." He nodded, then returned to his room. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the house adjust to one less presence. That evening, I reviewed everything again. Messages, transfers, call logs, the anonymous text. A picture emerged that didn't rely on assumptions anymore. The manipulation wasn't loud. It was systematic. Relationships rerouted. Narratives softened where they needed to be, and sharpened where they didn't. I opened a new document and labeled it simply. Dates, events, evidence. No commentary. A call came in while I worked. Unknown number. I let it ring once, then answered. "I shouldn't be calling," a woman said quietly. "But I saw what happened to you." Her voice shook. She explained she'd been part of the planning group, had noticed late-night meetings that didn't make sense, had overheard an argument weeks before the wedding. Nothing she could prove, enough to confirm what I already knew. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know how to say anything sooner." "You just did," I replied. After the call, the room felt smaller, not because of fear, but because choices narrowed. Staying passive no longer preserved anything worth keeping. I separated the accounts that night, not all of them, just enough. I forwarded documentation to a lawyer Daniel recommended. The email stayed factual, no emotion, no blame. Before bed, I checked on Malik. He slept with his door open, one arm flung over the pillow like he always had. I adjusted the blanket and stood there, measuring what protection really meant now. In the kitchen, I packed lunches for the next day out of habit. The motion steadied my hands. When everything was ready, I sat at the table, phone beside me, notebook open, and added one more line beneath the others, while the house remained quiet enough to hear the clock move forward. Paperwork has a way of slowing everything down. That helped. The law office downtown sat above a bakery and across from a dry cleaner. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because waiting at home had started to feel like pacing a cage. The receptionist checked my name, handed me a clipboard, and went back to her screen. The lawyer Daniel recommended didn't rush me. He read without reacting, asked for clarification when dates overlapped, and marked pages with small tabs instead of comments. That restraint mattered. Emotion would have complicated things. Precision didn't. "You've done the right thing so far," he said after a while. "Documentation before confrontation." I nodded. "What you haven't done," he added, "is tip your hand." That became the rule. I left with a list that fit on one page. Separate finances fully. Secure personal records. Change access points quietly. Keep communication brief and factual. No speeches, no warnings. Back home, the house felt different with fewer voices. Malik stayed busy with school and friends. He asked fewer questions. Maybe he sensed answers were still forming. Dinner became quieter, but not tense. Plates moved. Homework got checked. Trash went out on schedule. Evenings turned into work sessions of a different kind. I spread documents across the table, scanned them, labeled files, then stored hard copies in a place I hadn't used before. Each task finished cleanly. No rush, no second guessing. When Tessa texted, responses stayed neutral. "Can we talk later?" "Not tonight." "Are you upset?" "Handling logistics." The words weren't cold, they were contained. One night, while backing up files, I noticed a login alert on my email. Location unfamiliar, device not mine. I changed passwords immediately, enabled two-factor authentication, and logged the time. The alert disappeared, replaced by a calm I hadn't expected. Another evening, while walking Malik's bike back into the garage, a car slowed at the end of the street. It didn't stop. Didn't speed up either. Just lingered long enough to register, then rolled on. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. I stopped sharing my schedule entirely. Meetings got rearranged. Routes varied. Phones stayed on silent more often. Not out of fear, out of discipline. At work, reassignment settled into routine. I handled different accounts, spoke to fewer people, kept my head down. Productivity stayed high. Complaints dropped. The absence of noise gave me space to think. Marcus tried once to bridge the gap. He called on a Wednesday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. He followed up with a text. "Family's worried. Let's clear the air." I didn't reply. That silence wasn't avoidance. It was strategy. At my mother's house that weekend, conversations skimmed the surface. Weather, food, church announcements. Marcus played host, moving through the room with practiced ease. When our eyes met, his expression tightened for a fraction of a second before smoothing over. Tessa wasn't there. She stayed with Renee, citing space and reflection. No one asked me how that felt. I didn't volunteer it. Later that night, back home, I reviewed the latest bank statements. Another transfer attempted. This one failed. The account had already been restricted. I documented it and closed the laptop. Sleep came easier than it had in weeks. Not deep, but steady. The next morning brought another sign. My phone displayed a missed call from an unknown number, followed by a message that vanished when I opened it. No trace in the log. That bothered me more than if it had stayed. I mentioned it to the lawyer during a follow-up call. "Keep note of everything," he said, "even what feels insignificant." Insignificant had stopped meaning harmless. Days passed in a rhythm that felt deliberate. Work, home, preparation. I cooked more, walked Malik to the bus stop when time allowed, asked about his plans instead of assuming them. Small adjustments, quiet anchors. One evening, while filing the last of the scanned documents, a memory surfaced uninvited. Years ago, during my first marriage, I'd ignored signs because acknowledging them felt like admitting failure. That lesson stayed with me longer than I wanted. This time, denial didn't stand a chance. I checked the locks before bed, not because I felt unsafe, but because control begins with simple things. The house stayed quiet. The street outside didn't draw attention. Still, awareness sharpened. Before turning in, I reviewed tomorrow's calendar. A meeting with HR, a follow-up with legal, school pickup at 4, dinner already planned. The list wasn't about bracing for impact. It was about readiness. In the kitchen, I rinsed a mug and set it on the rack. The notebook sat open where I'd left it. I added a few lines, then closed it without rereading, reached for my phone, and set an alarm for earlier than usual. Already thinking through the next set of tasks as the lights went off, and the house settled into another quiet night. The notice arrived on a Friday afternoon. HR wanted a meeting first thing Monday. No agenda, no names attached. Just a calendar invite copied to legal and my direct supervisor. The kind of message that pretends to be neutral while narrowing the room around you. I forwarded it to my lawyer and kept working. That lasted maybe 20 minutes before a second hit landed. Renee called, not to ask how I was doing. "Why didn't you tell me you'd been investigated before?" she asked. The word caught. "Investigated for what?" I said. A pause, then a sigh. "Marcus said there were concerns. About your behavior, about money. He didn't want to say anything, but now it's affecting everyone." That was how it spread. Not as a lie you could point to, but as a concern people felt obligated to pass along. I closed my office door. "There's no investigation," I said. "There's a reassignment." "That's not how it was explained," she replied. She sounded tired, protective, not of me. By the time the call ended, the story had already moved past me. I could feel it in the way words shifted, the way explanations hardened into assumptions. That night, Malik stayed late at a friend's place. I didn't rush him home. Silence filled the house in layers. I cooked and packed leftovers without appetite, cleaned as if routine could keep things upright. A knock came after dinner. Marcus stood there, hands visible, posture calm. He didn't ask to come in. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. He spoke carefully, choosing phrases that sounded reasonable. "People are worried," he said. "Your job, your mood, the tension with Tessa." I didn't interrupt. "I'm trying to help," he continued. "But the way things look, it's not good." "To who?" I asked. He tilted his head. "To anyone paying attention." There it was, the threat without teeth showing. "You should take a step back," he said. "Let things cool down. Maybe give Tessa space. Let the family handle things for a while." I nodded once. "Thanks for your concern," I said. He searched my face, then smiled tightly. "I hope you don't make this harder than it needs to be." After he left, I stood in the yard longer than necessary, listening to nothing in particular. The ground felt steady, everything else didn't. The next blow came from the bank. A freeze request had been filed on a secondary account. Not approved yet, but flagged. Someone was trying to move money again, this time under the cover of marital necessity. The paperwork had Marcus's handwriting all over it, though his name stayed off the form. That one shook me, not because of the money, but because of the reach. They weren't waiting anymore. They were pressing. Malik came home later than usual, backpack slung low. "Uncle Marcus asked me if you were okay," he said casually. "At practice." My jaw tightened. "What did you say?" "That you were busy." I nodded. That was fine. He studied me for a moment, then headed to his room. The door stayed open, music low. Trust intact but strained. Sleep didn't come. When it did, it dragged old memories with it. My first divorce. Courtrooms that smelled like paper and time. Sitting across from someone I thought knew me, realizing she didn't, or didn't care to anymore. Promising myself I wouldn't let my son watch me disappear again. Morning arrived without relief. Monday's HR meeting confirmed what I already suspected. No charges, no proof, just patterns and perception. Enough to justify continued distance, enough to stain without naming a source. I listened, asked questions, took notes. By afternoon, word reached me that Renee had canceled her plans to visit Malik for his birthday. Too much going on. She needed space. That one hurt more than the rest. I sat in the car outside the school lot when Malik got in. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "We'll do something small this weekend." He shrugged, accepting the adjustment without complaint. That resilience came from watching me handle loss before. The thought made my chest ache. That evening, a text from Tessa arrived. "I think we should file formally. This limbo isn't healthy." I read it twice. No apology, no explanation, just escalation. The room felt smaller, not because of fear, but because options were closing. I thought about staying quiet, letting the story finish itself, protecting Malik from another fracture. Then I imagined him years from now, learning that endurance was the same thing as dignity, that silence equaled strength. That wasn't a lesson I could pass down. I didn't reply to the message right away. Instead, I opened the folder I'd been building and added the day's developments. Dates, names, attempts, patterns. When Malik went to bed, I checked the doors, turned off the lights, and sat at the table with my phone face up this time. Messages waited. Decisions pressed. I scrolled once, then stopped, thumb hovering as the weight of what was being taken and what would be left if I stayed quiet settled in while the house held still around me. The email didn't come from anyone I knew. No greeting, no signature, just a forwarded attachment and a single line in the body. You should have this before they try to explain it away. I didn't open it right away. Habit, not fear. I saved it, shut the laptop, and went to make dinner. Malik needed to eat. The day still needed structure. Plates hit the table. Questions about school came and went. Normal life kept moving while something waited quietly in my inbox. After he went to his room, I sat back down and opened the file. It was a thread of messages, time-stamped, clear, not screenshots pulled out of context, but full exports. Dates lined up with weekends I remembered, late nights, gaps in explanations. There was no dramatic language in them, no declarations, just logistics, familiarity, and a comfort that doesn't belong to people crossing lines for the first time. One message stood out. Your brother-in-law almost caught us last time. We need to be smarter. The room didn't spin. My hands didn't shake. What settled in was something steadier than anger. Confirmation. I leaned back and read through the rest without rushing. Names weren't spelled out, but details didn't need help. Locations, patterns. The shape of it all matched what I'd been tracking for weeks. Someone on the inside had finally decided to stop protecting the wrong people. The phone rang while I was still reading. Unknown number again. I answered this time. I can't say much, a woman said. Her voice sounded tired. But I saw the messages before they were deleted. I work with Renee. I thought she knew. When I realized she didn't, I couldn't stay quiet. I thanked her without asking questions that would put her at risk. She didn't offer more. She didn't need to. After the call ended, I forwarded the file to my lawyer with a short note. No commentary, just the facts. The response came back quickly. Do not engage yet. This changes leverage. Leverage, that was the word. At the surface, nothing shifted. Marcus still moved comfortably through family conversations. Tessa continued presenting concern instead of accountability. The narrative stayed intact for anyone who didn't look closely. I looked closely. What I saw wasn't passion or impulse. It was entitlement. Decisions made under the assumption that I would absorb the cost, that I'd keep the peace, that I'd protect the structure even as it hollowed me out. Once that clicked, everything else lined up. The weakness wasn't secrecy, it was reliance. They needed my silence to keep the story balanced. They needed my restraint to avoid consequences. Without it, their confidence had nothing to lean on. I didn't confront anyone, not Renee, not Tessa, not Marcus. Words would have tipped the balance too early. Instead, I kept moving through the days as expected. Work, school runs, meals, documentation continued quietly. Each new interaction added context instead of confusion. Marcus tried again to test the waters. We should talk, he said during a brief call. Clear things up before they get messy. Now's not a good time, I replied. That was all. He paused longer than usual before hanging up. Tessa sent a message later that night. Are you hearing rumors too? I read it, then locked the screen. No response. Hope didn't feel like relief. It felt like alignment, pieces falling into place without effort. The path ahead still carried weight, but it no longer blurred. Before bed, I reviewed everything once more. The messages, the call logs, the transfers, the email. Each item stood on its own. Together, they told a story that didn't require interpretation. Malik laughed in his room while talking to a friend. The sound grounded me more than anything else could have. Protecting him meant choosing clarity over comfort. I closed the laptop, placed the folder back where it belonged, and turned off the light in the kitchen. The house settled into its usual rhythm. In the bedroom, my phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't check it right away. I set it on the nightstand, lay back, and let the quiet hold while my mind moved forward, already arranging what needed to happen next. The room filled faster than I expected. Renee's living room had always been loud during gatherings, but that night the noise felt forced, like people were trying to outrun something they already sensed. Chairs scraped, drinks were poured and left untouched. Someone laughed too early at a joke that never landed. I arrived on time, not early, not late. Marcus stood near the window, talking with my mother and an uncle. Tessa sat on the couch beside Renee, legs crossed, hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked composed, prepared. No one offered me a seat. I didn't ask for one. "We're all here," Renee said, voice tight. "Let's just talk." Marcus nodded, stepping forward as if he'd been waiting for the cue. "This doesn't need to be a fight," he said. "We're family." I set my phone on the coffee table without unlocking it. "Then let's stop pretending," I said. The room went quiet enough to hear someone swallow. Marcus smiled, patient. "You've been under a lot of stress," he said. "We understand that, but accusations—" "I didn't make any," I replied. He paused. "You've been acting like something's wrong," he corrected. I looked at Renee. "Do you want the truth?" I asked. "Or do you want the version that keeps this comfortable?" Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. That was enough. I unlocked my phone and connected it to the speaker on the table. No announcement, no warning. The first message played, then the next. Voices low, familiar, intimate without trying to sound romantic. Logistics wrapped in trust. Tessa's face drained of color. Marcus moved first. "This is out of context," he said quickly. "You don't know." I held up. More messages followed. Dates spoken aloud. Plans adjusted around other people's schedules. A reference to deleting threads. A joke about how easy it was to keep things quiet. Renee stood up. "Turn it off," she said. I didn't. The final message played. The one that mentioned me without using my name. Silence spread across the room. Not shock. Recognition. Marcus cleared his throat. "You invaded privacy," he said. "That's illegal." "Everything you're hearing was shared voluntarily," I replied, "and already reviewed by counsel." That word. Her voice cracked at the right places. "It used to work on me." "So you made choices," I said, "and so did I." Marcus tried again. "This didn't mean anything," he said. "It got complicated." It meant. I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Bank statements, transfer attempts, dates matching the messages, a timeline laid out cleanly. "These are attempts to move money without consent," I said. "These are communications meant to shape perception at my workplace." Renee stared at the papers without touching them. "You told me he was unstable," she said to Marcus, her voice low. "You said you were protecting me." He reached for her hand. She pulled away. "You crossed a line," she said. Marcus straightened. "I was trying to manage a situation," he said, "before it hurt more people." "You created it," I replied. No one argued that. The room didn't erupt. It collapsed inward. Conversations stopped forming. Explanations fell apart mid-sentence. I gathered the folder. "I'm filing tomorrow," I said. "Financial separation is already in motion. Legal representation is in place." "Tessa, I prepared," I replied. "There's a difference." My mother finally spoke. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I met her eyes. "Because silence was the only thing keeping this stable," I said. Until it wasn't. Marcus stepped back toward the window. The confidence he'd worn all evening slipped. Not replaced by panic, by calculation that no longer had room to operate. "This doesn't have to be public," he said quietly. "It already is," I answered. I turned. She nodded once, tears forming but not falling. I didn't wait for permission to leave. At the door, Marcus spoke again. "You're tearing the family apart." I stopped without turning around. "You mistook my restraint for consent," I said. "That was your last mistake." Outside, the air felt ordinary. Cars passed. A neighbor walked a dog. Life continued without commentary. In the car, my phone buzzed with messages I didn't read. I started the engine, checked the mirror, and pulled away from the curb, hands steady on the wheel, as I headed back toward a house that felt quieter every mile I put between us. Morning came without urgency. I packed Malik's lunch the same way I always had. Sandwich wrapped tight, fruit on the side, a note folded once, nothing sentimental. He ate quietly at the counter, phone face down, already taller than I remembered him being last year. "You picking me up today?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'll be there." That promise mattered more than anything else on my calendar. After he left for school, the house felt settled, not empty. I gathered the last of my documents from the drawer by the sink, slid them into a folder, and set it beside my keys. The lawyer's number sat at the top of my call log. I didn't need to dial it again. Everything that needed filing had already been filed. Tessa's name appeared once on my screen that morning. No message, just a missed call. I cleared the notification and kept moving. At work, HR finalized the reassignment in writing. No apology, no admission. The paper trail closed neatly. Legal would handle the rest. My role stayed intact. My responsibilities narrowed. That was fine. Stability didn't need applause. Around noon, my sister texted. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I read it once, typed back a single line. I know. Nothing more needed saying. Consequences moved quietly but firmly. Accounts remained separated. Attempts to reverse transfers failed. The lawyer confirmed a temporary order barring further access. No drama, just limits enforced. By the end of the week, word traveled the way it always does, unevenly, without control. Some people avoided me, others offered support without asking questions. Marcus stopped calling entirely. His position at work shifted, committees dissolved, invitations dried up. Power rarely survives daylight. I didn't follow the details closely. Detachment came easier than I expected. That Friday, Malik and I ate takeout on the couch. He talked about practice, about a girl who'd laughed at the wrong moment, about nothing important and everything that mattered. You okay lately? He asked between bites. Yeah, I said. Better. He nodded, accepting the answer without probing. Trust, once repaired, didn't need constant explanation. Later, after he went to bed, I walked through the house one last time. Closets half full, drawers already sorted. No anger rose up. No nostalgia either, just clarity. I carried a box to the car and placed it in the trunk, then another. Not everything, only what belonged to me. The rest could stay where it was. The door closed with a soft click. I paused on the porch, not to reflect, but to check my pocket for keys. Habit. Useful ones survive change. As I pulled away, the house didn't look smaller. It just stopped claiming space in my head. That night, I slept without checking my phone. In the days that followed, routines rebuilt themselves. School runs, work hours, grocery lists that made sense again. Conversations stayed direct, boundaries held. I didn't seek forgiveness. I didn't offer it either. What I let go of wasn't a marriage or a role. It was the reflex to disappear for other people's comfort. One afternoon, while waiting outside Malik's school, I watched parents gather without knowing one another's stories. Everyone carried something. Not everyone put it down. When he got in the car, he buckled up and asked what was for dinner. I told him. The engine turned over smoothly. Traffic moved. The day continued. Nothing dramatic followed. No speeches. No closing statements. Just distance created where it was needed. Silence where noise had done enough damage. And a steady drive forward with both hands on the wheel, leaving behind what no longer belonged to me.